Menno, in the old school bodybuilding world, there was you have to basically bulk and cut and just rinse and repeat basically until you die. And that was what everyone kind of did for a very long time. And now there's also, I guess, this opposing group of people that are saying, well, you can main gain, which is eat at maintenance and make your gains that way. And in terms of gains, we're talking about building muscle here. I want to know what you think on what is the best thing to do for the average person. The people that are listening to this aren't professional bodybuilders. They're serious lifters, but they're not, getting into their undies and getting a fake tan and standing on stage and competing. They are mainly, lifting to get muscular, to get stronger. So I'd love to hear it from that perspective in terms of what they should be trying to do.
Mm-hmm. So research is quite clear is that there is an optimum level of deficit and probably an optimum level of surplus to build muscle and lose fat without, when you're bulking, gaining too much fat, or when you're cutting, losing too much muscle. So there have been multiple studies which found that if you cut too aggressively, so your energy deficit is too large, you lose muscle mass. And in some studies, you actually don't lose more body fat percentage because instead of recomping, you now lose muscle mass. And the body fat percentage loss is kind of the same. So you just get overall worse results. Same body fat percentage loss, but you also get the strength loss and muscle loss. And then for bulking, there have been numerous studies now, including one that I just co-authored, which found that additional energy surplus beyond a very, very small surplus contributes nothing to muscle growth in natural lifters. And I think there is some differentiation here with enhanced individuals. We don't have that in research, but anecdotally, it does seem that also in my clients that are enhanced, if you just give them more calories, you just build more muscle. But in natural lifters, if you add calories beyond a certain point, it just contributes to fat gain. So you get this little bit of muscle growth that you can build. Like if you just look at the total amount of muscle growth that you can build in a month, and you equate that to net metabolizable energy density, like how much energy the body actually has to store, it's a very small amount. So you're looking at something like 100 calorie surplus or something. And it makes sense that beyond that point, there is still some additional muscle growth probably, but very, very little. Most of it is shuttled to fat gain. You can't just eat yourself to the Olympia. So those lines of research that, too much surplus is bad, too much deficit is bad, have contributed, I think, to the idea of main gaining or gain-taining. And recently we had the first study on this, which found that people doing a 10% energy deficit ended up having much more efficient results than people that try to main gain. So people that try to be at maintenance, they actually ended up in a minor energy deficit, but that's part of the point because you never really know that you're at maintenance. You always kind of hover around it. And they had similar gains in fat-free mass and strength, but the fat loss was just twice as large in the 10% deficit group. So it is the case that, some deviation from maintenance just speeds up your results. And I would think that the same applies to bulking. So we know that energy deficit is bad. And I think much of the gain from bulking is actually avoiding the energy deficit and making sure that you don't dip into that energy deficit, because most people, when they're at maintenance or in a very small surplus, they actually dip into energy deficit some days when they're more active, and then other days they spill over a little bit. You're not so super static into the 3% energy surplus as it seems on paper. So that 5% surplus, the benefit of that might actually just be that you're avoiding the energy deficit more consistently compared to the 3% surplus, rather than that the additional surplus really matters. So that's kind of my current thinking on this. And that means that bulking does make sense, but you should do a very, very lean bulk. Like research is very clear that the old school dirty bulk is just a recipe for fat gain in natural lifters.
So if you're enhanced, you were saying that you potentially just continue to gain more muscle if you ate in a bigger surplus. So that whole dirty bulk thing might apply to those people that are on gear. But then you also said that when you are bulking, the surplus counted up until a point. Is there a definitive point or is it a range?
It's a very, very small surplus. And it's so small that research currently cannot definitively say that a surplus really is better than maintenance. That's why the controversy exists, where some people say, like, look, if it doesn't even matter, then I'm just going to be at maintenance and I'm just going to recomp. The thing is, recomping just doesn't work in practice for advanced lifters. So for beginners, intermediates, yeah, and I think many more people can still recomp, lose fat and gain muscle at the same time than they think. But we do know that an advanced bodybuilder cannot just be at maintenance their whole life. And like, you don't end up in contest shape at maintenance, right? It's not like the body is just like, we're just going to keep recomping, and then you're 5% body fat and like insanely jacked. And I'm just still eating at maintenance. You just plateau at a certain point in practice.
Yeah. So then, yeah, sorry, actually, a little personal story. Like, I had that too, where, like, this is where my fallout of main gaining was, or gain-taining, whatever you want to call it, was because I went through this crazy, stupid phase when I started lifting, and I got obsessed with getting lean and basically eating nothing. I was on 1,500 calories for an extended period of time, around 3 months or over, and I was around 90 kg. Do you speak kg or do you speak pounds?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I speak both. I'm so international.
Yeah. I try to, but pounds always throws me off. So I was basically, like 90 kg at high school when I finished high school. And then about 3 to 6 months later, I was 69 kilos. So I was reading all the bro simplyshredded.com, bodybuilding.com forums, and reading about intermittent fasting and lean gains method and all of that. And I ended up going down this whirlwind of intermittent fasting and keto and low carb and 1 meal a day, the warrior diet where you fast for 20 and then eat for 4. And I just lost all this weight because I wasn't eating enough, and also lost a ton of muscle. So I was at 69 kilos, basically a little stick. And I couldn't have main gained my way back to where I am today, where I'm about 92, 93 kilos with heaps more muscle mass. And I just, like, I would never end up at 90 where I just put on like 20 kilos of muscle just from being at maintenance. And that's always been my problem. Like, if you want a dramatic transformation, and obviously I dramatically lost weight, so I think that my body weight was just basically coming back to some sort of homeostasis. But you see some people that put on a decent amount of muscle mass, and I just don't believe that you can do that at maintenance, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so mechanistically, to gain muscle mass at maintenance, you have to recomp, essentially. Because if there is energy maintenance, so there's no energy being stored additionally in the body, but you do want to store muscle mass, like that additional stored muscle mass, that's plus energy, there has to be negative energy at another point. So main gaining or gain-taining requires body recomposition. And yeah, I think that practically we can simply rule out that happens in super advanced lifters, because as we said, you would just end up in contest shape at some point, because you would also have to keep losing fat, right? You can't just build muscle mass. You have to also lose fat to be at actual maintenance.
So what about, I've seen, and this is kind of getting into the nitty gritty, but there have been people that'll be like, well, some days I'm going to do a surplus and some days I'm going to do a deficit. Is that a more appropriate way of attempting to main gain or gain-tain? Or does it end up like weekly, basically, like if you look at it like a budget, like calories over the week, it's the same shit. Is that the same thing with trying to gain-tain?
I think the total weekly cumulative energy balance is still the most important thing. You can't just game the body too much by having like 1 day energy surplus, 1 day energy deficit. Then you still have to end up recomping. Plus, we know that what practically people call kind of momentum when bulking, there is something to it physiologically in that some of the adaptations, like hormonal adaptations, upregulation of anabolic hormones, leptin, they take a couple days. So you get some effect if you just eat an energy surplus for 1 day, but you need a couple days to really get leptin, for example, to a much higher level than it was in energy deficit. And it's still speculative how much that matters for muscle growth, but I think you're not going to get very far if you're not in a cumulative energy surplus either.
So could you go like a 5-2, 5 days in a calorie surplus and then like 2 days? So like that 5 days would keep that signal of the, of the hormonal signaling and the leptin. Would that 5 days be enough? And then the 2 days of a deficit? Or once again, are we in the same spot of the weekly?
Yeah, you can do that. As long as, again, the cumulative total ends up being a surplus.
Right.
And I do this for some clients where you have basically 2 cut days, as I call it, or calorie cycling. And then ideally you do the cut days on the rest days. So there might be some nutrient partitioning advantage that the extra calories on the bulk days are more likely to add to muscle growth when they're on a training day and post-workout. The post-workout being like between the workout and bedtime, not necessarily like directly post-workout. I think that makes sense. There's some evidence for superior nutrient partitioning with calorie cycling, but it's contradicted by some other research, so not entirely clear if that works.
Yeah, I've never really dipped too deep into the calorie cycling because of that reason, where it was, I guess the general consensus was, well, it's kind of, I think if you're stepping on stage or coaching clients that are stepping on stage, it's worth the extra effort. But for the kind of average person, it doesn't seem like it's worth, like if you're already struggling to track your calories and macros, having like, one day at 3,000 and then the next day at 1,850 and then trying to balance that seems a bit too much.
Yeah, you need something practical. So one thing I like to do with clients is basically when you're bulking, you retain 1 day per week where you keep eating like you were cutting. And I think this actually has some practical advantages. For one, people often don't mind 1 day per week that they kind of sacrifice in this sense. And also it keeps you in the habits of the cutting. So what you often see when bulking is when you just start bulking, you're like, oh yes, awesome, more calories. And 2 weeks later, you're kind of force feeding yourself. And then when you're cutting, when you start cutting, it's actually like, oh, actually, I kind of look forward to cutting. I have to kind of eat a bit less. 3 days later, you're like hungry and you want to bulk again. So the calorie cycling like that, if set up well, for some individuals can actually practically help, I think, where you keep the memory of the cutting. So you appreciate the bulking more. And when you start cutting again, you also have kind of the same meal plan that you just fall back into. Because that shift can also be a problem. Like, what was I eating again when cutting? It's like you have to figure out the meals again.
And on that note, I think also having that day of cutting is also a reminder to still be controlled with your diet and still track your calories and macros. Like, it's very common for, once bulk mode is activated. And this is once again that downside of, having that momentum effect on the build. You don't get that momentum effect if you gain too much body fat and you dirty bulk or just have too many calories, because then you just end up getting to a point where after 2 months or 3 months, you look in the mirror and you go, I'm fat, I need to cut again. And you've only had 2 or 3 months to build when you could have had 6 to 9 months if you were more disciplined, or if you had something like a tool of that cutting day to remind you, hey, we're not just eating everything and putting on a ton of muscle, because you're probably just going to get fat and build a minimal amount of muscle.
I've actually quantified this exactly with my students as a rule of like how their clients are doing. You want to bulk, in my experience, at least 4 times as much as you're cutting, or at least what I call it, lean bulking, maintenance, not be an energy deficit. And ideally more like 6 times. And if it's like 3 or less, then clearly something's wrong. Like you're either losing too much muscle when cutting or you're gaining too much fat when bulking, as you're saying, because then it is an actual cost because you have to spend that time cutting again. So the lean bulk also has the advantage that you can continue it for longer, and as you say, kind of keep up the momentum. And that's probably one of the biggest things actually I see, that this not having the right energy deficit and surplus, one of the biggest reasons I see in intermediate lifters where they don't manage to get to the advanced stage. I did as well. I did like bulk phases, cut phases. I look at my photos a year later and I'm like, I look the same.
So what was your problem? Were you just too aggressively bulking? Because I feel like that would be the more common pitfall that you fall into, because no one's really like cutting too aggressively, because no one's going, oh, I'm just going to eat 500 calories less, unless you're a bit of a maniac and you just like to go aggressive and get shit done. But
I was a maniac.
Okay. Yeah. Well, like, I feel like there's always a period of life that you do have that sort of maniac phase. But then I feel like maybe as you mature, or maybe that's just the people I work with or what I've seen as I've gotten older, I had that maniac phase too. And that's when I went too maniac and ended up 69 kilos with no muscle. And I was wearing like a 28 size pair of jeans, which is, probably the size of like a hat that I would wear. But I feel like people would more so aggressively bulk more. Is that what you found as well?
Yeah, I see both. I think bulking is harder because the energy surplus is so small. So I think it is feels like most people
feels like maintenance.
Yeah, exactly.
Or sometimes even it feels like
maintenance.
It can feel like a deficit too.
Yeah, if especially if your food choices are too bulk oriented, so your total food volume has gone down a lot. Like you have the food choices for the dirty bulk, but you don't have the calories to actually do it.
Yeah, I think so too. One thing that I learned and have have practiced for a while, trying to extend the bulks. So I used to follow like, and this was around, and you've probably followed it too. Like try to gain like 1% of your body weight per month. I personally found though, but that was still a bit too aggressive for me, for my liking, or for people's kind of what they saw in the mirror. And now I've kind of switched down to about 0.5% of your body fat, or sorry, 0.5% of your body weight, your total body weight per month. So like, if you're so let's just go like I'm averagely around 90 kilos, then you're gaining about 450 grams a month, which is like 100 grams a week. Very slow. What do you think of that as like a strategy for someone? And do you think that ticks the box of the small surplus, but enough to give the signal of building?
Yeah, it's certainly in the ballpark. It's very individual. So for a beginner, or in general, anyone who can gain a lot of muscle mass, so whether that's a beginner or someone on gear or someone who has a lot of muscle memory, you can gain faster. And the more advanced they are, the less you can gain. So the total potential for muscle growth also kind of dictates the surplus that you can use. And there's also big differences. There are big differences between individuals. And we see this very clearly in research. So in practice, what I do during a lean bulk is I don't actually have monthly targets. I just try to gain as much weight as possible, which is a very low amount, without discernible fat gain. So I want to see on a weekly basis objective strength gains, and I want to see the average weight of the week be trending up in some degree, at least over a 2-week basis, but ideally also a 1-week basis. But I want to see no effect on circumference measurements or caliper measurements. And if you do see a consistent effect on that on a weekly basis, you're gaining too fast almost for sure. And in practice, that ends up being very close to like the 0.5%. 1% is like you're doing really well as a trained lifter.
Yeah. I think that's kind of like where I'm sitting at. One last question on this, like while we're kind of talking about building, is there any reason that you could find why you would want to gain faster, like put on more body fat on a bulk, other than, let's say, coming out of like being too lean, like, extremely too lean, where it's like a challenge to your health?
Yeah, so there's like the contest rebounds, where you could make an argument that you're in such a catabolic state anyway that might as well just gain some fat. And certain weight class athletes, when they move up a weight class, they sometimes have it where you're going to be at 80 kilos anyway, so might as well actually bulk up to fill out the weight class if the competition is very important, because for the long run, actually, you would just want to still do it slowly. But in practice, for most listeners, probably no. Like the fat gain, it's hard to justify. It's easy to gain, hard to lose. Most people go the wrong way. They gain too much fat.
Yeah. When do you decide, or when do you think people should try to build or try to cut? And is there like an ideal weight that people should be at for their weight and their height? Like I got that question a lot. Not so much now. I feel like people are, a bit more intelligent, but like I would definitely say like in the kind of between 2015 and 2020, there was a lot of, what's the ideal height for me? Or the ideal, sorry, not the ideal height, the ideal weight for me. Should I cut or should I build? They were asking me these questions as if I'm God, but like what's your stance on that?
I used to think it was more important than it actually is based on the research. There are a couple findings that being overweight in particular, so literally outside the ideally healthy range, so like above 21% fat for men, above 30%, 33% for women, you start seeing some decrements in anabolic sensitivity. You start seeing decreased recovery capacity, so a given workout takes longer to recover. Work capacity during the workouts can also be lower, in part just because of conditioning, cardio, if you don't actually do cardio to kind of compensate for the higher body fat level. But if you then actually look at the research where people of varying body fat levels are doing a strength training program, you don't really see a relationship between their body fat level and how much muscle they gain versus how much fat they gain. So it doesn't seem to be that important in the end. Interestingly, the thing that suffers, especially in like obese individuals, is strength gains, because they have problems with muscle quality, and that actually interferes with strength gains more than it interferes with muscle growth. Is that relevant for, say, a powerlifter? Probably not, because I would expect that their muscle quality is very high to begin with. And they're supposedly healthier than the average individual that's at that body fat because they exercise, their diet's probably better. So in practice, really personal preference is the number one determinant. But both for practice and a more holistic perspective of health and wellness, I would say yes, stay in the ranges that are accepted to be healthy. So don't get into the overweight range unless you're an athlete that has a specific purpose for that.
Okay, so basically what you see in the mirror, like just kind of, well, okay. So if you're a dude and you're approaching your 20% and you're a female approaching that 30%, it's time to cut regardless of what you think. If you want to get stronger or if you want to build muscle, you think that, unless you're an athlete that needs to be a certain weight, that would be your recommendation?
Basically, I mean, if a woman is like, yeah, I want to be 35%, I want to be super curvy, perfectly fine. But if you're like, yeah, I would love to be 25 or 20%, and now it's 30, should I keep bulking? Start cutting. Like in general, you should not hoover too far away from your ideal body fat percentage, I think. One big caveat is that we now have looked at kind of the upper end, the maximum body fat level, physiologically speaking. But there's also very clearly a lower end. Now, this is not a concern for most individuals, but you do not want to be contest shape for most of your life. We see that below around 10% body fat for men, 20% for women, you get pronounced decreases in anabolic hormone levels. And we also see that recovery capacity deteriorates. So we actually know that very low and very high body fat levels are bad for recovery. And we also see this anecdotally with injuries. People get injured way more when they're, say, 7% body fat trying to compete, do a lot of volume. And then it's 15%, they're much more resilient. So there's clearly also a too low end, but this is mostly for the people that have already figured out how to cut. And then they kind of get obsessed with that and they don't want to get fat anymore, even to the extent that it sabotages their own gains.
Yeah, their screensaver is like them standing on stage and they just kind of obsess about that. Yeah, it's not healthy. I've never stepped on stage, but I've been very lean at some points, and it's definitely not worth it. I think that the 10%, and realistically speaking, if anyone needs to be lower than 10%, well, not even needs to be. It's like, let's say someone that works in fitness because, I don't know, some people want to look like that and aspire to it. But, for the average Joe, there's no added benefit of getting to, 7%, 6%. Like, you don't get like a certain, higher quality or, of a mate if you're doing that, or you're actually weaker in the gym, and you're potentially gonna, if you stay there for long, you kind of just like lose muscle mass and end up being skinny, which is, to come back to my story, that's where I was. Like when I first dropped and did the whole 1 meal a day, intermittent fasting, low carb, and got obsessed and like tracking my calories in, I was on like 1,500 calories. Like after like a month, I felt like I looked really awesome because I still had that muscle mass because I was still training throughout. But then after like 2 or 3 months, that's where it just started to get depressing. But then you just get so, you looked malnourished. I remember my current girlfriend at the time was like, "You look sick. Like you look crazy." And I was like, "No, like you just don't get it. I'm just a hard worker. I'm just like so resilient." And I just got into that kind of, like you said, that manic mode. And it was just downhill from there. So to come back to like a similar, like when to determine to build or to cut, what advice do you have for people that are sitting in that skinny fat range where they don't have like a really, really high amount of muscle mass, but they also don't have a low body fat percentage?
Still cut first if that means that you're going to the healthy range, because you can probably still recomp at that point. And the additional muscle growth from bulking at that point is not that large. So that's actually a really good candidate for a really good candidate for positive body recomposition. So I would say cut first if you're skinny fat, even if that means that, you do end up looking very skinny. The reality is that you are very skinny, like you have very little muscle mass. So that's simply how it is. It's not like we can do some magic trick where you need both. You need muscle growth and fat loss. And the most efficient way to achieve that at that point is cutting. Now, as for the optimal body fat level, this is basically the perspective I have on it. Optimal body fat level is individual, and it's the body fat level where for you get the highest pros versus cons. Now, it seems very obvious, but in practice, it means that you have dieted down to a lower level than that, and you have concluded that that was not worth it. So for me, 10 to 12% body fat likely is my ideal body fat, because I know, yes, I prefer how I look at 8%, but it is not worth the restriction. It is not worth the loss of libido. It is not worth the increased stress sensitivity, and is just not worth hardly being able to incorporate it into my lifestyle. So at 10% body fat, I can still go out to eat a lot. I can do social events, of course, all under control, strategic, but I can actually do it at 8%. I just can't do it. Like, you're always eating at home. You have very few food choices available. Your well-being, overall level of, your overall quality of life is simply lower. And that's not offset by looking a little bit better by bodybuilding standards, which, as you say, many people don't actually even care about. So when you have achieved that, you've been leaner and you've concluded it's not worth it, then you can actually confidently say, yes, this is my optimal body fat level, and you can decide it and be happy with it. Because I think that's the main problem that many people have. When they're 15% body fat, they're like, yeah, maybe it's not worth being leaner, but you don't know. Like, you haven't actually been there and told and concluded for yourself it's not worth it. And when you've actually done that, you are much happier with it. So you can be 15% and you're like, this is good. I'm happy with this. Yes, I'm not super shredded, but I'm lean. I look good. I feel good. 15% is it for me.
I think that's where social media really screws people up, because even if you're thinking that individually, like, man, I feel really good at 12 to 15%. You open up Instagram, you see some guy 8% who's like, I'm 8% year round. This is what I do for training. This is what I do for diet. And you go, oh man, now I feel shit about my 12 to 15%. I'm going to push for 10, when that's kind of going against your belief system. Anyway, that's a whole kind of different topic, but I think that's really what's like screwing people up. Like, I'm not sure if you see it with the clients that you coach, but there's definitely so much comparison, and like, even like, they know if they're like in their 50s, but they're training in the gym with like, there's like teenagers there, high school dudes, or 20, 30-year-olds with no kids, no marriage, just kind of like roaming around, living their great life with like an abundance of time. And they're just like absolutely jacked out of their minds. And then they're like, oh, Brock, like, I'm super happy with my results, but I saw this guy at the gym, but check out this influencer that, like, he's a vegan, and look, he looks better than me, and I'm like, unfollow that guy.
The problem with social media is that you get the highlight reel and you don't see the full picture, which include the costs. So you see the benefits, but you don't see the costs. So you don't see that this influencer, which is actually 10% or 8% body fat year round, you don't see that their whole life is dictated by how they look. You don't see that they are walking around with a camera crew their whole life. Like, I've been with a lot of influencers and they're literally, their whole life, they're not present at any moment. They're just thinking about how to take the shot. So when they're at the restaurant, they're thinking about how to make the photo of the food. Like, the food is cold by the time they're actually eating it, because they've had to take, the good photo of it and everything. And they're constantly thinking about how to put this on social media rather than actually living their life. So their life is what they're sacrificing to give you that impression of their life is their actual life.
Is this why you choose, and this is kind of, a bit of a tangent, but is this why you choose to kind of stay a bit more faceless and a bit less like vloggy with your content? Like, obviously you're very well known, you provide great content, but you're still deep in the weeds of research. Your YouTube is very just like, here's the data, here's the facts, these nutrition myths need to die, and this is why your coffee doesn't hit hard. It's not like, check out my life in Dubai, or like, this is I'm hanging out with this guy, that chick.
This was indeed very deliberate because, for those that don't know, I'm a digital nomad. So for the past 15 years plus, I've lived in over 50 countries and free traveled the world. It's a little bit less now because I'm more bound to studios and having good recording equipment, which actually is the first thing that really kind of grounds me. But that aside, which actually I am considering, like, see, now I am still bound by the social media and stuff in a way. So I never wanted that. And I always thought about like, what do you get if I make a highlight reel of my life? And I could have done the whole travel vlog thing way before other people were doing it,
Mate,
because I was traveling
yeah,
before Uber, Google Maps, anything.
yeah.
So I concluded what I get out of that is kind of this weird e-fame where you just get viewers. But in the end, I'm running a business and it's a professional account. Like the content is actual educational content. And that's what I want to give. I want to have a value added business where people exchange money for value and not just, have, be a travel vlogger, because for one, I don't think it's that reliable or sustainable a business model. And
I don't think they make great money.
No, secondly, I think it's hard on your well-being. Like I said, you're sacrificing your own presence, your own quality of life to make it seem better for others. And I never wanted that. Also, for the people around you, it's a big negative. Like that's real. So I very deliberately concluded to have personal and business very separate. But I do realize that now some people are like, I don't even know where you live, man. So it's the people do really want that. So probably the actual optimize, even for business, would be to be a bit more personal than I am. But it doesn't fit me. Like I would have to really go out of my way to make selfies and all that stuff. So yeah. I also think I just wouldn't be good at it either.
And then that 8% body fat will start looking a bit nicer.
Yeah. And then indeed you fall into that creep as well, as an influencer where, let's say then you have a very strong incentive to be 8% body fat then to show it. And then you start justifying it to yourself. And then you end up being something that you didn't want to be. I see that all the time in influencers where also with products, for example, they start recommending things. And at first they're like, look, if I'm not actually using this and I didn't buy it myself, I'm not going to recommend it. And then it's like, if I get it for free, then I used it and I can promote it if I think it seems good. Or if I would get it for free. And I'm like, but would you buy it yourself? They're like, no, not really. It's like, I don't know about the recommendation then. Yeah. And then it slips further, it's like, I could see people using this. And then it's like, at some point they just forget about it. It's just like, yeah, I got it, so I recommend it. And it just becomes like a cold business thing. Yeah. So you kind of, in the end, we are what we do. And you can have this different version of yourself in your head and kind of fight that idea. But in the end, if you act like a certain person, then you simply will become that person, I think. So you should be careful with that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I've seen, like, I've got two daughters, and I was a bit more personal before. I'm kind of stepping out of it now because I don't really want to expose them too much to it, or be on my phone or trying to capture everything. So then they're like, I already take some photos, and then my daughter's like, "Oh, can I see it?" And then I don't want to stop what we're doing just to look at this photo that I took. Mm-hmm. And I could imagine, like, man, imagine if I had like a 4K camera walking around. Like, she's always just going to want to look at it. She's not going to be present. And I've seen other, let's say influencers kind of become parents, and then it kind of looks a bit desperate. Like they're trying to look like they're having a better time than they are. They're trying to kind of pump up their kids, and then their wife's kind of looking at them like, what are you doing, man? Like, we're just walking down the street. Why are you so happy? And they're like, oh, this is what I'm doing. And it kind of looks sad. And actually, unfortunately, I don't know if you heard recently about Conor Murphy. Did you hear about him? He was like a YouTuber, and he was like a lean, kind of like a Jeff Seed type personality. And he was doing YouTube, and then he got like jacked, and then he was doing like silly videos and kind of or like gym humor type videos, and he kind of kept doing it, and then that became his identity, his like personality. He was doing that, and he was doing all these kind of like jokes and pranks and taking his shirt off in restaurants and like public places and flexing and all that kind of stuff. So that was him. And he kind of started doing all these videos, and then everyone was getting worried for his mental health. And then, I think it was literally this week he passed away. I'm not too sure how he did it. I think there was drugs involved and all that kind of stuff. But, there's been quite a lot of examples of like, if not people, obviously passing away is terribly sad, but if not that, then like completely burning out or completely losing their mental health, especially in the fitness world. Anyway, how do we get to that? I'm so sorry. We went on a big tangent. I did want to talk about the current state of, I guess, evidence-based content online and the overall message that's going out. You know, obviously I'm a big fan of your work. I love your YouTube channel. I love your presence in podcasts, which is why I obviously wanted to have you on mine. But I feel like, and this might just be Gen Z, but there's so many accounts coming up where they've just absolutely lost the plot, in my opinion. They're like wearing mouth guards and like doing like eccentrics and just like squeezing, or they're saying like, this is not optimal. This is how you do a curl. And obviously they're young, so they're not going to have much muscle mass, but they literally don't even look like they lift. And then they're developing all these big followings. And even if they are kind of, you know, in the world of looking like they lift, the message is like so specific that I feel like they're missing the bigger picture. And I feel like on the other end, you know, there's the old school meathead bodybuilding, which is like just, you know, Tom Platz it and just like go for it and just absolutely murder yourself every session, where I think, you know, that may not be the best advice for everyone to consume, because then they'll just get injured, or they'll be like kind of, you know, every kind of 50, 60-year-old at the gym that's been lifting heavy for ages and they can hardly walk properly. But like, what's your opinion on where it's heading, and what do you think we can learn from both sides?
Yeah, so I think what has happened since, say, the 90s with evidence-based fitness, speaking as someone who was kind of in the first to second batch, if you will, of actual evidence-based people in fitness, I think evidence-based fitness, or what's now science-based lifting, mainly due to Jeff Nippert, I think, has become too popular and is now getting a backlash. So evidence-based fitness used to be a very niche of a niche, and then it became too mainstream. And as it became more mainstream, it attracted a lot of people that are tangentially evidence-based. So many of the people that you're citing, they're not actually evidence-based. They're not following scientific guidelines for evaluating evidence and making claims. They are identifying as science-based, but they are reaching way too far with their recommendations, and they are extrapolating from the science far beyond the point that the actual evidence allows. And that gives a bad reputation to science-based lifting and evidence-based fitness as a whole, which is, I think, undeserved, because nobody's going to a hospital and say, look, I want that medication that has not been scientifically tested. I want the one where people just say it's good, even though the evidence says it doesn't work, right? Fitness is the same. It's, in the end, kind of medicine. It's part of biology, and science is simply the best way to answer a question. Science is like no nonsense, rational thinking taken to uncommon levels. And honestly, that's all what science is. It's like measuring things, seeing how it performs, and thinking everything through very well. So almost all the kind of no nonsense, no bullshit lifters, they do the same, but not to the same extent. Like, everybody agrees that if you look at one individual and they say this works, okay, but if you look at 20 individuals, it's better. And we also agree that if they just did their circumference measurements, or they just, trust me, bro, like I am doing better, we think it's better that if you measure muscle growth. And we think it's better if you use an MRI machine, because we have evidence that the MRI machine has higher precision than the ultrasound. And then if you do all of those steps and, you do the randomization, you get to a scientific study. So scientific studies are just common sense taken to uncommon levels. And there is no dispute that evidence-based thinking is the way to answer a question in the best way. The only problem right now is that what is evidence-based has become very diluted. So actual scientific guidelines, what you could publish in a scientific paper and get through peer review, has become the niche of the niche of the niche of people that actually are in the science-based lifting community. And many of them are simply not truly evidence-based. So it's become very difficult to identify like who is actually evidence-based and who is not. And I think this is a general problem with social media, where we have information overload and it's very hard to filter. So that's where we are now. And where is this going? Well, I mean, evidence-based fitness is not going anywhere, but I think we are in the backlash phase, and we're not out of the depth yet.
Is that why you're diving deeper into studies, like you recently announced, like that you're funding your own studies and you're diving deeper into it? Is that big? Well, not necessarily diving deeper into it. You've always been in the weeds, but I guess like playing more of an active role. Is that because you want to be more at the heart or at the center of evidence-based fitness as opposed to, just being on the content level, but actually being in the research?
Yeah, I think we can do better. Like, I've always been part of the research, but I'm making it a bigger part now and more systematic part. So I think we can do as an industry better, and we have a lot of people that are really passionate and that they also have actually the ability to fund things. So I've personally funded quite a lot of research, and things people like Brad Contreras, Mike Israetel, they've also given a lot of their personal money to research. And that's amazing. Like, what other industry do we have that we have people that are so passionate and they have the means to actually do our own research in a way that we want it for our target audience. So I think there's a lot of potential there, and I'm definitely going to continue on that route. And by and large, I'm just doing my own thing, and like reach and everything is way down compared to last year when science-based lifting was still in the big uptick period. But that's, I think, just a phase, and I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And I trust that evidence-based fitness is only going to grow. Like, we get more knowledge. It's just become, it's certain things that we now call part of evidence-based fitness. They're just going to be mainstream knowledge in 10 years.
So what are things that are on the forefront of your mind at the moment in terms of studies that you want to see?
We still the whole lengthened partials idea. That's and training at longer muscle lengths. That's just extremely interesting because some studies find big effects and show that, okay, this exercise outperforms this exercise by a wide margin. But there's also a lot of other research that contradicts it, and we don't exactly know the mechanism. So we don't have a unifying theory yet of like what is causing the greater growth at longer muscle lengths. Is it mechanical tension? That's my theory number one. And then the next step is, okay, so how do we start quantifying the active plus passive tension component so that we can actually predict, like, this exercise does make sense to do at longer lengths, but this one does not. And I have some theories, but we do need a lot more research on this. And we are seeing an explosion of research on this front to the extent I think that a lot of other people are already a little bit sick of it.
Yeah, well, that was one of the questions I wanted to ask about. Like, do you think that we've kind of lost ourselves in this whole deep stretch? Like, obviously, Dr. Mike was copying a lot of shit on, like, just kind of obsessing over it, like with the lying dumbbell bicep curl. And, everyone's like, what's this guy doing? Because he can't use much weight, or, and then like every exercise was like, oh, how do we make this a deep stretch? Because that means it's going to be better. And then everyone was kind of, going, oh, you just need to shut up and train hard, or, having other effects and opinions. What's your current stance on it in practically implementing it in a program? Is it try to make it deep stretch, or is it try to see what works for you, what feels best, what do you feel gives you a better pump, or what do you feel works best for your body or leads to less injury? I know this is a very kind of like open question, and you said that it hasn't been resolved, but where are you currently standing on it? Because I'm playing around with it too. And I never really used to think about it as much until it came up when you and the others were talking about it.
I think it's the main thing that we know is that everyone already knew full range of motion is better than partial range of motion. And now we know it is specifically because of the extra range of motion at longer lengths. It's not the range of motion at shorter lengths, it's the extra range of motion at longer muscle lengths. And now we're figuring out, okay, so is it that more is always better? No, it does not seem to be. Is it super consistent? Like every exercise always benefits trained, untrained? No, also doesn't seem to be. So now we're figuring out, like, what is the context in which the extra muscle length matters? And I think almost every program should have at least one exercise that targets every muscle at a long length. And I think it's just a general good principle to target muscles across their entire length with the whole program. Beyond that, certain exercises lend themselves well to lengthened partials if you can use more weight, which is a proxy for that the lengthened part was otherwise being understimulated. Like in a leg extension or a calf raise, which is, by the way, the two exercises where we have the most compelling evidence for lengthened partials. It makes a lot of sense because a normal leg extension machine, this depends on the machine, but a normal machine has a pronounced sticking point at the top, right? There's this point, just like a row, where at the top you just can't straighten your like 100% anymore, but you can still go like 95 and then 90 and then 85. So there are a lot of these extra reps that you could do, but they're not quite full reps. So if you just stop at full range of motion, then you're leaving a lot of kind of mechanical tension on the table. And if you do half reps, then you actually see that you can do way more reps or you can use substantially more weight. And I think the total tension area under the curve, so tension by time, is going to be higher because you're just at a higher tension area. You're not limited by the low amount of tension that you can produce with the leg straight. So these exercises, which again in practice you can kind of identify by being able to do way more if you're not super strict on a high range of motion, like a row. Like if you get the elbow all the way behind the body, you fully touch the implement to your chest, you can do way fewer reps than if you just kind of row until your elbow is kind of in line with the body. And this also biomechanically makes sense based on the strength curve of the lats. So I think it makes sense to do it there. But then even then, I would not do your entire program with it. And that's because if you only train at one length, you get all the fatigue in that part. Like we know that injuries are bound to have a high specificity. So you get injured from repetitive strain, by and large. And if you only do like one part of the range of motion, then you're overloading that exact part all the time, which probably increases injury risk. We know that fatigue is part range of motion specific. So if you only do that range of motion, then you get all of your fatigue there. Might limit your total capacity to handle volume. And practically a very big one is that progressive overload is very difficult to implement with lengthened partials and the like. Like it's already difficult with a leg extension, but if you know that the leg goes kind of horizontal, you can be like, okay, that was the rep. And maybe you can keep going after you stop counting for progress when the leg is no longer horizontal.
Yeah.
But when you're like, it's like 45 degrees,
how
are you going to track that? Yeah, it doesn't work. So that I think is an argument to at least do the first set with full range of motion, and then maybe your later sets with lengthened partials, and then you use the first set as a benchmark set. But that's just a practical way to know that you're implementing progressive overload, which is important because if you don't know if you are progressing, then you don't know how to adjust your program or whether to adjust it at all, because you don't want to fix what isn't broken.
Yeah, that was one of my pickles that I had with lengthened partials, just as a, I guess, intensity technique or something that you can do in the gym. Was just like, number one, it's so fatiguing. So I feel like if you're doing it on every set, it's really going to diminish how much you can do in the following sets, unless you have a very substantial rest period. So once again, that eats into time. But secondly is the measuring. So what I did is I use it. I prefer to do like my standard sets, let's say full range of motion always. I've always been a big fan of full range of motion. I think it just makes sense. But then with the lengthened partials, I would do it like on the final set and just basically just crank it out until I can't do anymore, because then I'm not doing that exercise anymore and I found that I was still able to train efficiently, but then still kind of get that last set effect of the lengthened partials. Do you think that's a smart way to do it? And has there been research on like how it affects subsequent sets after it, or not really?
Not that much, no. But that's almost exactly how I teach it to my students and clients. Like for most exercises, I start full range of motion to benchmark performance. And then in the later sets or just the last set, I do lengthened partials. And I think you get most of the benefit. Like we do see in research that if you are targeting the muscle at long lengths in some way, and then you add more to it, you get very little additional effect. So we see big effects when it's like an exercise that's just purely training the muscle at shorter lengths. And you look at another exercise at longer lengths, but then when you have an exercise that's already very good at long lengths, adding even more long length focus on that, for many muscle groups at least, doesn't seem to have a lot of additional effect.
So then in that case, does it work the other way, where if you're doing a longer length muscle group exercise, then doing like shortened partials, or is that not as beneficial? Because that kind of seems like how it would yin the yang of, doing a shortened exercise with lengthened partials. Does it work the other way around as well?
I think a different exercise, at least. I think if you do the same exercise just at shortened lengths, it's still too close. So the fatigue is still too high, still very high overlap in fatigue. But if you do another exercise, then that makes sense. So if you have multiple exercises in the same day, I think it makes sense to do one at shorter lengths, one at longer lengths. But in general, erring on the side of full range of motion exercises that train the whole length, just one being very, like a fly or a pullover, and the other being more like a pull down or a more standard exercise.
Okay. We need a... I did want to kind of talk about the 10 to 20 sets recommendation, because that has also been quite hot. Well, in the content that I consume. Like people are like, oh, you just need to do 10 to 20. And there's people saying, no, you just need to do 3. You just need to do 4. Where's your stance at with that?
It's still a generally good recommendation. It's very simplified. So what I teach students is that you assess someone's recovery capacity, and based on that, you try to estimate their total volume tolerance. Because the general framework, I think, makes sense that in most studies in general, and especially based on the latest meta-analysis, more volume leads to more growth, but we know in practice you have to be able to recover from it. And not just your muscles, but also your joints, your connective tissues. So I think there are actually a lot of scenarios where people would theoretically, or their muscles at least, would benefit from higher volumes, but they can't handle it in terms of injuries. And I think people conflate those things. So they conflate the workout just being too intensive, too mentally draining, being injured, and actual neuromuscular recovery. And they just group it together into recovery, but they're separate things. And you have different solutions to these different problems. And that's the important part. So if, for example, you're limited by injuries, but it does seem that higher volumes do produce greater gains, then you can do, for example, higher reps, different exercise selection, and really address what body parts are suffering from the injuries and how to assess that. So that's more like a prehabilitation type challenge rather than just decreasing the volume, which is a very sledgehammer approach to the problem. So in general, 10 to 20 sets, probably a good guideline. Some people might actually be better off lower, and we see that in some research within individual studies that different individuals do have different optimums.
Is there something, sorry to jump in, is there a certain individual that does fit that? Like, is it like a stronger individual that has like, a very strong absolute load because it's too taxing on the body to do like 20 sets of a back squat or a leg press or, just like quads. If you're doing a substantial amount of weight, is that a factor?
Mm-hmm. No, it doesn't seem to be training experience. If anything, I would think that the more advanced you get, the more volume you can tolerate. Like we do know that ability to handle volume goes up. So a given workout is less stressful for a more trained individual, even given the same proximity to failure and using a higher weight. Because their muscles, they regenerate faster, they have the repeated bout effect, they have angiogenesis, they have more blood vessels, and in general, it makes sense, right? The muscle gets more trained, gets more robust, it can handle more. Whereas a beginner, they just you have a good training stimulus, and at some point you just max out the growth, which is kind of the newbie gains effect, which is problematic in some studies, though I think people overestimate how bad it is. But the beginner, they might just cap out their growth, and then advanced individual, they have to kind of at some point do everything right just to make any gains. So if anything, I would think that optimal training volume, in theory, goes up. But if you also know how to train hard and you program well, then again, minimum effective volume applied consistently still works really well, also for advanced lifters. So it's not that it's absolutely necessary to always go high volume. As long as you have a good program, minimum effective can be really effective. And in the end, what's the turtle wins the race against the hare if they're more consistent. And it's like that too with volume. So in the end, I think you should really look at factors like your sleep, stress level. For example, we have studies that students in exam periods, they recover about twice as slowly as when they're not in exam periods from the same given workout. So stress levels are very important. Sleep is very important. It also seems to have about a 2-fold difference with like good sleep, bad sleep. And training experience, like how familiar they are with the exercises, how advanced they are. And then a really big one, which we don't have a lot of research on, but we do have one study showing that in people that go into Ramadan fasting, which is not necessarily an energy deficit, but the vast majority of the day, at least, they are in energy deficit, and it's not a great time for recovery, probably. They actually had made better strength gains when they decreased their volume by like 30% compared to a group that just stuck with their pre-Ramadan volume. So if you combine all of these lines of literature, I think it makes sense that, when my clients, they get a client that is an investment banker, doesn't sleep much, high stress levels, not too experienced, and is cutting. So they're a little bit overweight, which in itself, being overweight also hampers recovery capacity. You're not going to give them the same volume reasonably as the bodybuilder that is like has nothing else to do than being a professional bodybuilder. So perfect sleep, low stress levels. Their job is just eating and going to the gym. They are bulking right now, so they're like a 10% energy surplus, and they're a well-trained advanced lifter. You should not give those individuals the same volume. And I think now where the research is going is figuring out what exactly are the predictors like I listed some of them, but some of them are more speculative than others. What exactly are these predictors so that we can tailor someone's individual optimal training volume?
Yeah, and I think just with the way that people are living these days, I don't think that their recovery is very, like people are doom scrolling. They should be asleep at 10. They're going to sleep at 12 or 1. The stress, like everything. Like I've definitely seen a change just from coaching people for, over 10 years. Just the shift in like the way people are living and how it's impacting their training and even just their level of, let's say, time they have. It's just being cut, like, well, not in half, but it's being cut so much where like they're struggling to find time to eat or to prepare food, so that everything is just kind of like eating out on the go, and everything's kind of compounding because then they're working later, then they're eating worse food, and it's kind of getting worse and worse. But it's interesting, and I do agree with the kind of like tailored level of training volume, but it's just, I guess, like you're saying, at the moment, very hard to dictate. I did have a last question. I had Dr. Eric Helms on, and we had a conversation about many things, but we did end up talking about peptides, and obviously it's been hot for a minute. And he was, along the lines of there's very limited research in humans, and if there is, it's not the most trustworthy evidence. And I'm seeing more people use it, and obviously what we're currently doing, like the stats in Australia aren't very good. Recently a report came out where 2/3 of Australians are overweight. 1/4 of Australian children are obese, and now being overweight is like a greater reason for poor health and death than smoking is. So like what we're doing isn't working. And then obviously these are coming to market where a lot of people are saying, this is a solution for people that don't necessarily want to train. They just kind of like want a quicker fix, and it's a start to get their foot in the door, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that, they can be the solution for that in people? And what's your overall opinion on it? I know it's very open. I don't really like saying, what's your opinion on this? Because, like people will put in your DMs, thoughts on peptides. You're like, for what? For who? Blah, 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 blah. So yeah. I don't really like it, but, I've kind of tried to paint the picture for you.
So with peptides, first thing to differentiate between is the peptides that most people now talk about, like VPC and the growth hormone boosters, and other peptide drugs like GLP-1 agonists, which are completely legit and are now evidence-based, and they are revolutionary and they have boomed for a reason. So these drugs, yes, they can actually help curb the obesity pandemic, and they are already doing that. They're extremely effective, but they're not a solution in the sense that they just lower your appetite. Now, you can just stay on them for life and then you have a lower appetite for life, but diet quality still really matters. And now there's increasing attention to muscle mass because many of these people, they start eating the same crappy diet, but now less of it. So they have lower protein intakes, and they already weren't exercising, and they now end up with very low levels of muscle mass. So the next pandemic, low levels of muscle mass. That's happening, and there are now a lot of drugs on the way as well to try to combat that. Regardless, for most individuals that do not want to be on a GLP-1 agonist for life, the other peptide drugs are not the solution, almost for sure. Like all the growth hormone boosters, at best, they will do what growth hormone does. We know what growth hormone does. It helps a tiny little bit with fat loss, but it also increases mortality and it decreases longevity. Growth hormone levels are strongly negatively tied to longevity. I don't know where this idea originally came from, that growth hormone is like some longevity booster, but research is very clearly the other way around. Growth hormone is like running your engine at a higher level. So it's just like with a car, you're running the engine at a high level all the time, it's going to burn out faster. And that's what happens when you add growth hormone. It doesn't even add muscle growth either. It's the most counterintuitive name ever, growth hormone. But growth hormone is not anabolic in human muscle tissue. At least not unless you pair it with immense doses of insulin and anabolics. Maybe there's some interaction there in bodybuilders. Anecdotally, there seems to be. But in a normal individual, if you just add their growth hormone, increase their growth hormone levels, yes, they gain lean body mass, but it's not in actual contractile muscle tissue. So it's mostly water. They get bigger bones and stuff, and if you add a lot for a long period of time, you actually get like bigger face and bigger organs and a lot of other stuff that you probably don't want to grow. So growth hormone is like for me, it's not even that interesting because the ceiling effect that you could get, we know exactly what it is. Like a peptide that boosts growth hormone levels, the perfect end result would be actually boosting your growth hormone levels. But that's not what most people need anyway. Now the BPC and the like, where it adds body protection compounds, it's supposed to be good for recovery. Those types of peptides, there are a couple of those. There is zero high quality human research on that. It's not like a few, it's not like one study, there's zero high quality. It's like, people will say, there's this one retrospective study. It's like from 1980s where they look back on 3 people without a control group or something. It's like, that's not a study. That's basically just trust me, bro. So it's almost all anecdotal. And we also know that there's a very high degree of fraud. So lots of the stuff that you buy online is fake, because the regulation is kind of iffy, and many of those labs, they sell it for like veterinary or research purposes. And then you're not getting a pharmaceutical grade, regulated, quality tested drug. So you're injecting something where you don't really know exactly for sure what it is, and you also don't know exactly what it does. So you're just going by the other people that have tried this, and they said something about it, but you also don't know exactly what they injected. So it's a very, you're a guinea pig. And bodybuilders love being guinea pigs. They're always the first to try all of this stuff. It was the same with a lot of anabolics in the UK, and the smart anabolics, and the stuff that was supposed to be the SARMs were supposed to be steroids without side effects. They don't work. But I've seen so many of these drugs come and go, and supplements, and I kind of put them in the same category. And there's a lot of hype, and then at some point you're like, this has to work, right? Because there's so much hype around it. 10 years later, nobody even knows it exists anymore. So I fear that's the same, and the risks are higher with the peptides. Now, maybe some of the stuff works, and who knows, there's a slim chance that some of the stuff actually works as advertised. But for me, I would always say, wait until we have good human data to know that it works, and maybe then inject it into your body. But before that, I really cannot recommend it. I also can't fault somebody for trying it. It's your body, but I can't recommend it as an evidence-based professional.
Yeah, I've had a few emails from companies trying to get me to sponsor it as well, because, I have a following and all that kind of stuff, which, makes it even worse. Obviously when you have a following and you see these emails coming through, you know exactly why people are promoting it all of a sudden. Or there are coaches now that are now biohackers. Like I saw a coach who doesn't have the greatest knowledge anyway, who like literally put biohacker in his bio now. Like nothing has changed about him. And well, I don't like that word anyway, but now he's that. And he's pushing on top of his coaching, this peptide, blah, blah, blah. Click on the link to this and that. And people are like, where are you getting it from? And it's this company. And then obviously they have a following, they're bought followers. But anyway, it's really dangerous for people that can't see it, because, obviously you and I can see a little bit under the hood. I'm sure you get emails like this, or maybe less because you're kind of less front facing. But those emails do come in, and they're like, do you want to push this? Give you a discount code, you get this much back, and blah, 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 blah. It just becomes really dangerous online. And also what's problematic about this, I've found, is that in the comment sections of these people that are talking about peptides, like BPC 157, there's so many anecdotal stories where they're like, I have my libido back. Or they're like, I didn't need surgery. I took BPC 157. Now my ankle's better. I can't believe it. I can finally walk without pain. And you see them, they're all so convincing. And yes, they might be working. It definitely could work. There could be an element of placebo. Maybe they actually worked, but then we don't really know what's going under the hood 100% as well, or what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years or 20 years, but no one cares about that. They're just reading the comments and going, well, this is really convincing. And my favorite influencer's talking about it, and I get 20% off.
So with the comments, I think an antidote that works for me is go to any carnivore proponent, read the comments. You'll see there are people saying, oh my God, it's cured my autoimmune condition. I'm leaner than ever. This is the best. I get my libido back. Go to a vegan influencer, read the comments. You'll see people saying, it's cured my autoimmune condition. I'm leaner than ever. My libido is back. Go to a high carb proponent. They'll say like, oh, I tried high carb diet, more energy than ever. Mental focus is sharp. Performance is better than ever. Now go to a keto proponent. You'll see the comments. More mental energy than ever. Feeling super sharp. Performance is better than ever. So that's the thing with the anecdotes, right? Like there's such a big mental component. Most people don't actually really measure what their outcome is. They think it's going to work. They try it. And some of them are already literally writing about how good it is before they've really tried it or measured the results. I've seen it in some coaching clients too. Like the first week of the program, they're like, this is amazing. This is awesome. And I'm like, good, to keep that mindset, but you don't actually know if it's working.
Yeah. That's the danger of social media once again. I like to end the podcast with 3 self-development questions. Because I'm a big fan of self-development. I know you have your own book, The 53 Habits of. It's not self-discipline. That's not the word. What's the word?
Science of self-control.
Self-control. Yes. So, like, I've been a big fan of self-development from a young age. The first book I read was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and since then, I was around a pretty standard upbringing. But I was never in the world that, basically anything is possible, that you could leave your hometown and that you could, go and do all these things, work for yourself, all that kind of stuff. I live around like a very, just kind of like standard upbringing. So when I read these books and when I read quotes and when I heard about habits and things like that, it kind of really, really hit me hard and like transformed me to move cities and really push. So I'm really passionate about that. So I did want to end with these last 3 questions. And it's basically a quote, a book, and a habit that you do that makes you better, or that that someone's told you, that you live by. So I'd love to start off with a quote that has made your life better.
One of my personal favorite quotes is, "Obsession is a word the lazy use to describe the dedicated." I think we get so much flack in fitness, and if you're the one at a restaurant not eating dessert, people try to drag you down to their level. And it's good to reason that if you really want to get good at something, then you have to be what is considered obsessive by some people. And it's just different standards. In the Netherlands, if you play a sport more than 2 times a week, that's like extremely intensive. In the US, if you don't play it for hours and hours a week, you're just like not trying. So it's just a different standard. If you really want something, then you have to kind of put in serious work and make it a big part of your lifestyle. So with fitness too, serious results require serious lifestyle change, and don't be apologetic about it.
A book that has made your life better.
Well, I recently read, it's not a new book, but I only recently read it, The Elephant in Our Brain. It's a bit dark and grim. It's like the reality of human nature type book in a very evolutionary psychology type view. So it's, not flattering for humans, but it's very real. And I've always loved psychology because it helps you in a lot of ways in life. If you have better communication ability, if you understand why people do what they do, then I think it helps in every aspect of your life. So that's a book for people that are into like red pill type psychology books. The Elephant in Our Brain is a good one.
What's one thing that you learned from it?
People's motives and how incentives really shape almost everything we do, and how important virtue signaling is. Coming back to social media as a prime example, but many of the things we do, whether it's expensive jewelry, the clothes, the cars we buy, there's such a big status component. Status is a very, very, very big part of our life, and it's hardwired in us from a very, very deep evolutionary base. Like Jordan Peterson has talked about the serotonin level being associated with the status of lobsters. And it's a great example because it shows how deep down these systems are hardwired. And when you see the world in that way and you understand how much of what people do, also in fitness, is more status signaling than actually about what they're really saying, then it really helps you understand things.
Awesome. And a daily habit, or a habit that you may do every day. It could be a daily habit, or like just one thing that you do every day that helps make your life better.
I think one extremely practical tip, which is also a big part of the one in my book, have one thing every day on your agenda that you know you're going to do, and it was already set the last day. You're going to do that today. That's like your one thing. Just get that thing done. If you consistently do that every single day, so every day you wake up, you know that one thing that you're at least going to do, you're going to be so productive. Because most people, when they really look back on their day, a lot of what they did was just kind of maintenance, answering emails and just being busy, but not actually being productive. And if you make sure that every day there is one thing that you're doing, which is like, it has to be a bigger thing, right? Something that requires creativity or intellect, not just like, oh, I answered that email from my boss. No, it has to be something real that gets you further towards your goals. If you do that consistently, you'll be amazing. You're going to achieve so much, because most people, they don't measure their productivity, they measure their busyness. And if you get that one productive thing every day, you really don't have to work that many hours. But if you get a few hours in doing something that you know is productive and is important towards your goals, it's a game changer.
Awesome, Menno. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, man. It's been awesome. I've been watching your stuff for a while. I actually coach a person that's like in your PT course at the moment. So he's like, like I'll pass on things or I'll write a program and he'll kind of come back and be like, wow, this is what Menno's talking about, and that's not me trying to say that I'm, close to you or anything like that. It's just, it's awesome to have such a great voice in the evidence-based, fitness industry that I, try to be a part of as much as possible. Not as active as you, as in paying for research and things like that, but just trying to put out good quality information that people can decide, for themselves, it's good or not. And it's a bit harder because you're not like, this is the thing, this is the best exercise, this gives you huge lats, this gives you a six pack. It's very like, you could try it, it's going to take your hip flexors out of this, and this is why it's preferred. And then people just kind of switch off, kind of. So thank you so much, especially your long form content. I really enjoy it. And it's cool to see, like on your YouTube channel, like, even though you're not very focused on putting your personality in it and stuff, it's cool to see, you being you in your stuff. So I appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, mate. Do you want to send people anywhere? Is there anything that you want to push?
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's amazing to hear, and I respect what you're doing. If people want to follow me more, at menno.henselmans on Instagram and YouTube. That's the number one way these days.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much, man. I appreciate everything you do.
My pleasure.